Scanner warned, do not engage. Deathworld Girl stopped the instructor's sword barehanded. The scanner screamed once, and Kavo's throat frills snapped flat. Across the glass, the human girl looked down at the floor mark instead of the red screen. Kavo ran live safety trials for Rathkel, and the Axiom chamber was supposed to make his job boring. This morning, it erased Juno Hale's result and left one line behind. Do not engage. Her file said Human Exchange Cadet. The other students had already started calling her the Deathworld Girl. Under Rathkel's 22nd First Contact standard, a senior instructor should have been able to take control before a new student could become a real threat. The machine wanted no first contact at all. Keep that warning in mind, because Kavo was about to trust every system built around it. Juno leaned toward the glass. Did I stand in the wrong place? For a beat, Kavo did not answer. Earlier that morning, Juno had walked into intake carrying a plain academy bag and asking where she should leave her shoes. Kavo had seen dangerous students arrive before. Some came wrapped in armor. Some had claws they could not hide. Others gave themselves away through heat, scent, noise, or the hard stillness of a trained hunter. Juno had none of that. She wore the gray exchange uniform, sleeves rolled once at the wrist, and kept brushing a loose strand of hair away from her eyes. Juno Hale, Kavo had asked. That's me. Human. She smiled a little, still yes. He had almost marked that as humor. The scan started clean. Bone density sat inside the broad human range in her file. Grip shape looked ordinary. No hidden blade, no hard shell, no venom sac. Nothing about her body matched the kinds of obvious danger Rathkel had built Redline Court to contain. Then the result bars climbed. One band locked, it vanished. Another rose higher, it vanished too. Kavo opened manual diagnostics and checked the chamber seal, the limb scan, the floor plates, and the biological calibration. All healthy. He forced the Axiom system to show raw input instead of its final guess. The raw data looked boring. The threat model did not. It kept reaching for a normal engagement plan, rejecting it, then starting over. That was when the warning tone sounded. And now Juno stood behind the glass, waiting for Kavo to tell her whether she had put her boots on the wrong marks. A door hissed open behind him. Instructor Sarn Ket came in without hurry. The Talvek was broad through the shoulders, with the dense wrist structure that made his kind so hard to disarm. His training coat was already fastened. He had read Kavo's alert before entering. You reran it? Sarn asked. Repeatedly. Hardware. Healthy. Sarn stepped closer to the display. Juno watched him through the glass. She did not square her shoulders. She did not step back. She simply waited. Kavo brought up the raw scan. The model cannot place her in a safe first contact band. Sarn read the warning. Then he said, the array predicts danger. The court measures discipline. Kavo's frill pressed tighter against his throat. The line was not foolish. That was what bothered him. Rathkel had built its whole training system on that idea. Machines predicted. Instructors tested. One checked the other. If the model feared too much, the court showed the students real limits. If an instructor missed something, the machine caught it first. Sarn had spent his career proving the method worked. His blind spot was control. He believed that if Rathkel controlled the floor, the weapon output, the distance, and the pace, then Rathkel controlled the danger. Anything allowed into Redline Court was still a threat inside rules. Kavo looked at the warning again. The machine did not say use caution. It said do not engage. Juno tapped the glass with a knuckle. Kavo opened the intercom. Yes. Should I keep standing like this? For the moment. Okay. She lowered her hand. No edge in her voice. No challenge. That calm bothered Kavo more than a threat display would have. A nervous student could be slowed down. An angry student could be watched. Juno seemed to think she was waiting for a slow lift. Sarn folded his arms. She has no listed sword training. That makes the warning worse, not better. Or less useful. Kavo turned from the screen. You want a live test? I want the test our rules require. The argument was already moving toward Redline Court. Kavo could feel it. High-level Redline work carried a 29% medical stop rate. The figure was posted in every prep room so nobody mistook a controlled assessment for harmless play. Sarn knew it. Kavo knew it. Juno had signed the same warning sheet during intake. Kavo said, "Then I lower the weapon ceiling before she enters." Sarn's jaw shifted. Agreed. I put medical staff at each exit. Agreed. And if the array throws another hard stop, I end the session. Sarn looked at him. If the court proves the machine right, you will not need to argue with me. That should have settled Kavo. It did not. He released Juno from the chamber. The glass door slid aside, and she stepped out while rubbing her fingertips together as if the scanner air had dried her skin. Bad result, she asked. Unclear result, Kavo said. Sarn gave her the same direct look he used before practical exams. We need a live assessment. Juno glanced back at the red screen. Because it says not to. Because we need to know why it says not to. She thought about that, then nodded. That makes sense. Kavo stared at her. Sarn noticed. Examiner. Nothing. It was not nothing. Most students asked how dangerous the test was. Some asked what weapon would be used. A few tried to argue down the risk. Juno had heard that a machine built to judge threats had refused to recommend engaging her, and her response was that the follow-up made sense. They crossed the short passage to Redline intake. Juno set her academy bag on the bench. Kavo began the equipment check while Sarn entered his instructor code at the court door. The bag held a water flask, folded gloves, a paper notebook, wrapped food bars, and a small steel object tucked into a side pocket. Kavo stopped. It was a worn machinist's divider, no longer than his palm, with rounded tips and a hinge darkened by years of use. Declared tool, he asked. Juno looked over. Oh, that's my grandfather's. What does it do? Measure spacing. Kavo turned it over. It looks close enough to a blade that the court will ask me to log it. It's not sharp. I can see that. She came nearer but did not reach for it until he offered it. He used it when we set braces under damaged rescue machines. Mark each side. Check the gap. Make sure the load isn't going somewhere stupid. You worked on rescue machines. Mostly held things, and got told not to stand under anything heavy. Sarn, still at the door panel, said, useful advice. Juno nodded, very. Kavo logged the object as a civilian measuring implement. The words looked plain on the screen. He placed the divider in a clear storage slot beside the court entrance. Juno watched where he put it, then went back to tightening the cuff on her sleeve. A small tool, a small habit, a small line in an intake record. Kavo did not know why his frill stayed flat. The court door opened. Redline Court was built to remove excuses. The floor could change grip. The walls read speed and impact. Training weapons sent live motion data to Kavo's station. If anyone crossed a set limit, the system could cut power or end the exchange. Sarn stepped onto his marked side and selected a practice sword. Kavo lowered the allowed output and watched the court accept the change. The sword icon turned green. The floor limits turned green. Medical status turned green. Juno's panel did not. It stayed blank except for a thin red border copied from the axiom warning. No rank, no safe match label, no suggested opening distance. Kavo tried to clear it. The court had accepted every limit he set. It still refused to suggest how Sarn should begin. The boarder came back. Juno stayed at the entrance until Kavo finished the consent slate. He read the terms aloud. She listened without rushing him. Do you understand that the assessment can stop at any time? Yes. Do you understand that you can stop it? Yes. Do you agree to continue under the limits shown here? Juno read the slate herself before signing. Yes. Kavo passed it to Sarn. The instructor signed too. For the first time since the warning, Kavo felt a thin piece of order return. Consent, limits, medical cover, live telemetry. These were the parts of the system that had always made sense. Then Sarn asked, any formal weapon training? No sword training. Combat sport. Some grappling. How much? Juno made a small face. Enough to know I'm not the best person in the room. Sarn almost smiled. Good answer. Kavo did not. The scanner had not warned them about the best person in the room. It had warned them about her. Sarn moved to his start mark and rolled the practice sword in his wrist. The blade was inactive, its edge field locked off. Even so, the court tracked its path as a real strike. Juno stepped onto the opposite mark. She looked down at her feet. Then she shifted one boot slightly. Should I move however feels natural? She asked. Sarn raised the sword to a ready line. Yes. Juno let her hands hang loose. The court light changed from white to red. Sarn moved first. Not fast, not for him. The practice sword came down on a clean diagonal line meant to force Juno backward and establish control. Kavo knew the strike. Every red line examiner did. It was the kind of opening that gave an unclassified student room to make one safe choice. Juno made a different one. Her right hand came up late. Kavo's frill tightened. The sword should have crossed her guard before her fingers reached it. Instead, her palm met the reinforced flat close to Sarn's hand. Her other foot slid half a step with the motion. The blade stopped with a dull click against her skin. Not bounced. Stopped. Sarn froze. Juno looked at his wrist, then at his face. Do you want that back now? Nobody answered at once. Kavo's station filled the silence with warning tones. Sarn's grip was still locked around the handle. Juno was not squeezing the blade. She was simply holding it where its path had ended, as if someone had passed her a tool in the middle of a repair. Then Sarn said, release. She did. He stepped back with the sword. Kavo hit pause before either of them could move again. The court lights returned to white. Juno lowered her hand and checked her palm. No cut, no swelling, no sign she had even noticed the impact. Kavo stared at the collision trace. His first thought was strength. It was also wrong. The peak force at Juno's hand sat far below the value his eyes had expected. She had not met Sarn swing head-on. She had touched the weapon near the point where it had the least leverage against her, then moved with the last part of its path. The sword had not lost to her grip. Its own geometry had betrayed it. Kavo replayed the motion. Once, then slower. Juno had placed her hand in exactly the wrong place for anyone trying to overpower the blade, which made it exactly the right place for someone who understood how not to. Sarn looked toward the glass. Examiner. You didn't hit her as hard as it looked. His brow lowered. I know what I delivered. That is not what I said. Kavo sent the trace to the wall display. The line showed the swing, the contact, the tiny movement of Juno's hand, and the sudden collapse of force at the guard. Sarn watched the graph. Juno watched Sarn. That bothered Kavo. Most students watched the data when their own performance appeared on the wall. Juno seemed more interested in whether the instructor was comfortable with what had just happened. Sarn finally asked, You've done that before. With a sword. Yes. No. His eyes narrowed. Juno added, I've stopped long things from swinging into people. Kavo turned toward her. What kind of long things? Pipe a loose support arm once, loading bar. That is not the same problem. No, she said, but the hand part felt close. Sarn gave Kavo a look that meant continue. Kavo did not like it. Still, the court showed no injury, no limiter fault, and no rule breach. The machine had warned against engagement, yet Juno had just made the exchange safer than the instructor had. He resumed the floor. Sarn changed his stance. The second attack did not come from the same line. He drew the sword back farther, showed Juno one angle, then cut from another. This time she did not catch it. She turned her shoulder and let the blade pass. Sarn recovered at once and brought it across from the other side. Juno touched the flat with 2 fingers. The sword turned offline. That was all. No hard block, no dramatic grab. Sarn took another step and tested the opening again. Juno moved less. Kavo's frill flattened until it hurt. The luck explanation was gone. Sarn knew it too. His mouth had stopped carrying the faint half-smile he used with new students. He lowered the weapon. Pause. Kavo froze the court. Sarn walked to the glass rather than calling across it. When he reached Kavo's station, he kept his voice low. She is reading the blade. Maybe. You disagree. I think the blade is the least important thing she's reading. Sarn looked back. Juno stood where he had left her. She was rolling one shoulder and looking at the ceiling track that held the court sensors. What did you see? Sarn asked. Kavo brought up both exchanges. Her contact points changed before your line became obvious. That means anticipation. Or she is reading you. Sarn's jaw tightened. Kavo pointed at the trace. Your shoulder loaded here, your hip turned here, the weapon followed. Sarn said nothing. Kavo added, she moved when you committed, not when the sword arrived. Across the floor, Juno raised a hand. Both males looked at her. Am I allowed water during pauses? Kavo stared. Sarn closed his eyes for a moment. Yes, he called. Thanks. She walked to the edge, drank from the flask Kavo had checked during intake, and returned to her mark. The court felt different when she stepped back in. Not louder. Smaller. As if the systems around her had become the thing under examination. Kavo opened a comparison request. Sarn saw it appear, now. If what she did is standard mechanics, we should be able to reproduce it. With whom? Kavo selected 2 qualified weapon retention specialists from the adjoining hall. Neither had watched the exchange. That mattered. They entered expecting a calibration test, not a contest. Kavo explained the motion without naming Juno's result. Same practice sword, same limiter range, same opening cut, same target contact zone near the guard. The first specialist tried to stop the blade. His palm was driven offline. The court marked the attempt unsafe. The second adjusted his stance and met the sword closer to the handle. Better. Still not enough. His wrist bent sharply before he let go and stepped away. Medical did not intervene, but the court flashed amber. Sarn's face had gone still. Kavo dismissed the specialist after checking both hands. Only then did Juno speak. Were they supposed to copy me? Sarn looked at her. Yes. Oh. That single sound did more to Kavo's nerves than pride would have. She was not pleased they had failed. She looked worried. Did I explain it badly? She asked. You did not explain it at all, Kavo said. Juno blinked. Right. Sarn walked back onto the floor. He was no longer trying to prove the scanner wrong. Kavo could see the question changing behind his eyes. If the first stop had been strength, the specialist should have at least approached it. If it had been luck, repetition should have broken it. If it had been sword training, Juno should have known the names for what she was doing. None of those answers fit. Sarn raised the blade again. This time he feinted before committing. Juno gave ground. The movement eased something in Kavo for half a second. Then she stopped looking at the weapon. Her eyes dropped to Sarn's chest. He feinted high. She did not react. He shifted his lead foot. Her weight moved. He rolled his shoulder. She was already leaving the line when the sword came. Kavo felt the cold skin under his frill. Sarn changed rhythm again. Juno's answers got smaller. A tilt of the wrist. Half a step. A turn of the hip. Once she moved no more than the width of her own boot and let the practice edge pass beside her sleeve. The harder Sarn made the problem, the less she seemed to need. That was the point where Kavo stopped thinking of the scanner warning as fear. The machine had not panicked. It had failed to find a useful rule. Sarn pressed with a fast recovery. Juno slipped inside the useful length of the sword. Kavo's hand moved toward the stop control. She could have struck Sarn's jaw. She could have driven a shoulder into his chest. She could have taken the wrist. Instead, 2 fingers touched the scoring plate over his sternum. A soft chime sounded. Point registered. Juno withdrew before Sarn could even close around her arm. She stepped back to neutral distance. Sarn stared at the glowing plate on his chest. Juno asked, "Was that allowed?" Kavo almost laughed from the strain of not shouting. Sarn looked toward him. "It was legal," Kavo said. Juno nodded, "Okay." Sarn lowered the sword. For the first time, there was no dismissal in his face. "Only work." He asked, "Why didn't you strike?" Juno looked confused by the question. "The plate only needs touch pressure." "That was not what I asked." She glanced at the plate. "You were already open." Kavo opened the telemetry from that moment. The scoring contact barely rose above the court's minimum read level. He checked it twice. Juno had entered close enough to do real harm and chosen the smallest action the system would count. Sarn saw the same trace on his wrist display. Something settled in him. Not fear. Professional interest. That was worse for Kavo, because interest made good instructors keep testing. Sarn handed the sword to the court rack. For one hopeful second, Kavo thought he was ending the assessment. Instead, the instructor selected a different balance setting. The weapon's mass did not change. Its recovery did. Kavo opened the intercom. "Sarn. I know. You are moving beyond novice assessment cadence." "Yes." That was not the purpose of this session. The purpose was classification. "We have enough." Sarn turned toward the glass. "Enough to classify what?" Kavo had no answer. Juno waited between them, hands loose again. The scanner warning remained in the corner of Kavo's display. "Do not engage." He had spent the morning treating that line as a measure of danger. Now he wondered if it was a limit on the machine's confidence. Sarn faced Juno. "I want to continue at peer timing." Kavo said no. Both of them looked at him. He did not soften it. "The telemetry is not showing where her limit is." Sarn's eyes narrowed. "Then what is it showing?" Kavo pulled every exchange onto one screen. The first catch. The deflection. The evasions. The scoring touch. 4 different problems, 4 different solutions. And in every one, the same strange pattern. The more force Sarn brought into the exchange, the less force Juno used to end it. Kavo felt his frill clamp flat. "She isn't approaching her limit," he said. Juno looked up at the glass. Sarn did not move. Kavo enlarged the force trace. She's moving away from it. Sarn lifted one hand from the sword and pointed at Juno. Ask her. Kavo's finger stayed over the stop control. You say the court cannot tell us where her limit is, Sarn said. Then the next choice belongs to her. Kavo opened the channel. Juno, the assessment can end here. She glanced from Kavo to Sarn. Did I do something unsafe? No. Did he? Not yet. Sarn's jaw tightened. He wants to move to peer timing, Kavo said. The attacks will be harder to read and harder to stop safely. You are not required to continue. Juno looked at the practice sword, then at Sarn's stance. Will the limiter stay where it is? Yes. And you'll stop it if either of us gets stupid. Yes. She nodded, then I'm okay to keep going. Not bravery, not pride. Consent. Sarn returned to his mark. The novice rhythm vanished. So did the clean teaching angles. His lead foot shifted off-center. The next attack came with a false shoulder turn, a short cut, and a recovery that could become another strike without warning. Juno gave ground. Sarn pressed. She gave another step. For a short run, Kavo saw what he had expected from the start, a student being forced backward by a senior examiner. Then Juno's heel reached the outer scoring line. Sarn stepped in to close the space. Juno moved toward him. The sword was built to own distance. Juno erased it. Her forearm brushed Sarn's wrist without trapping it. Her shoulder turned past his chest. By the time he recovered the blade, she was already outside the next line. No strike. No block. No score. Yet Sarn had lost the exchange. The instructor reset and tried to deny the same inside path. He shortened his cut and guarded the space near the hilt. Juno stopped trying to enter. She pivoted away, let his recovery pull him half a step too far, then touched the back of his weapon hand with one finger. Sarn stopped. What was that? You were tight there. Meaning? If I pushed, your grip would open. He looked at his hand. Show me. Kavo cut in. No. Controlled demonstration, Sarn said. You already have live telemetry. I want to feel the point. Juno raised her hand. I can do it slow. Kavo dropped the cord into demonstration mode. The sword lost active scoring. Sarn held it in the same position. Juno placed 2 fingers against the back of his wrist. Don't resist yet. He nodded. She shifted his hand less than a thumb's width. The sword tilted. Now resist. Sarn did. Juno moved her fingers sideways instead of pushing harder. The handle rolled in his palm. His grip opened. The sword fell a few inches before he caught it with his other hand. Juno stepped away. That's the part I meant. Kavo stared at the contact map. The force was tiny. The result was not. Sarn turned the sword over. You're using the joint against the grip. Sort of. Sort of. I don't know your tendon names. Sarn laughed once. Then he reset. Kavo felt no relief. Curiosity had replaced dismissal, and curiosity was making Sarn more dangerous to himself. The next sequence started with speed. Sarn cut high, recovered low, reversed, then stepped across Juno's retreat. She slipped the first line. The second forced her shoulder back. The third came close enough to tug her sleeve in the weapon's wake. Kavo's hand returned to the stop control. Juno's eyes were no longer on the sword. Hip. Shoulder. Lead knee. Grip. Her gaze moved between them in quick checks. Sarn attacked again. Juno shifted before the blade. Again. She moved before the cut. On the next pass, Her hand touched Sarn's elbow as his weight crossed his front foot. He stumbled one step past her. Juno caught the back of his training coat and kept him upright. "Sorry," she said. Sarn straightened. "You stopped me from falling. You were going to hit your knee. I was attacking you." "Both can be true." Kavo muted the channel long enough to swear. The court could record speed, impact, hands, and feet. It could not record the choices Juno did not make. So Kavo started marking them himself. Open wrist after recovery. Exposed elbow during the step. Unprotected side after the feint. Balance break during the turn. Each time, Juno took the safer path. Each time, the system saw only lower force. Sarn called another pause. He walked to the side rail, filled a paper cup from the water unit, drank half, and set it beside the rack. Juno bent to retie one boot. A senior redline examiner was planning how to break an unknown combat pattern. The human causing the problem was fixing a loose lace. Sarn rolled his right shoulder. Kavo noticed. "Any pain?" he asked. "No." "Stiffness?" "No." Juno looked up. "Your right side is loading early." Sarn stopped moving. "You notice that? You've been protecting it since the fast set." "I am not injured." "I didn't say injured." Sarn stared at her. Then he picked up the sword. "Show me." Juno stood. Kavo said, "Sarn. One sequence." "You keep saying that." "One committed sequence. I want her to read it." Kavo checked the live strain values, still inside safe limits. Sarn looked past him toward Juno. "You heard him. I am changing the test again. Do you still want this?" Juno checked his shoulder before she answered. "If you're still comfortable continuing." For the first time, Sarn seemed caught by one of her questions. Then he nodded. "I am." "So am I." Kavo logged both answers. That mattered. If this went wrong, nobody would be able to claim the human had been dragged into it or that Sarn had been tricked into the risk. They were both choosing the next exchange with more information than they had possessed at the start. Juno was watching Sarn's shoulder, not the weapon. And the hidden layer finally became clear. She was not only solving attacks. She was protecting the person making them. Kavo sent a private warning to Sarn's wrist display. "Do not force the right shoulder." Sarn read it and changed stance, so the next cut would load from the other side. Juno shook her head. "What?" he asked. "If you switch sides now, you'll hide the problem, not fix it." "I know my own shoulder." "I'm sure you do." "Then let me manage it." Juno held up both hands. "Okay." No challenge, no edge. She stepped back to her mark. Kavo heard the calm in her voice and understood what Sarn did not. Juno had stopped trying to convince him. She was planning around him. "Last committed sequence under current limits," Kavo said. "Then I stopped the floor." Sarn did not argue. Juno nodded. The court went red. Sarn opened with a short cut. Juno slipped outside it. The second came from the recovery. She turned under his arm. Sarn pulled back before she could close. "Good." Controlled. Then he changed the pattern. His rear foot planted. Kavo knew the rotational cut at once. It was not reckless, that was the problem. The technique used the whole body. Foot, hip, torso, shoulder, wrist. Once committed, the sword carried enough force that meeting it directly punished the defender even under a training limiter. Kavo hit the stop control. Too late. The court could kill the scoring field. It could not remove motion, already inside Sarn's body. Juno saw it. She could have caught the blade. She did not. She stepped with it. One foot crossed into the rotation instead of away. Her left hand touched Sarn's wrist. Her right shoulder moved under his balance line. No strike. No slam. Just position. Sarn tried to lock his grip. Juno turned his wrist a fraction. The sword left his hand. It spun once and struck the padded floor. Sarn's body kept rotating. Juno stayed with him. Her arm crossed behind his elbow. For one sharp instant, Kavo saw the finish available to her. A hard pull would take the joint. Dropping her weight would send Sarn down with no safe catch. Juno did neither. She opened the lock before it closed. Her hand slid from his wrist to his forearm. Her other arm braced his upper back. She guided the turn into a kneeling descent, then lowered him until both knees and one palm were safely on the floor. The court went silent. Juno released him and stepped back. Sarn stayed there. Not hurt. Not armed. Not certain. The scanner warning still glowed at the edge of Kavo's display. Now he understood what Rathkel had missed. Juno was not dangerous because she could stop Sarn. She was dangerous because she had been choosing how safely to stop him. Sarn looked at the sword, then at his wrist. "Why didn't you finish the lock?" Juno answered at once. "You were already disarmed." No triumph. She said it like the answer belonged in a safety manual. Kavo forced his eyes back to the data. Something was wrong. Not with the court. With his notes. He had marked every place Juno could have used more force. He had not marked how early she had begun choosing less. Kavo pulled the opening exchange beside the final one, then the scoring touch, then the fast set. The same pattern appeared. The safe choice was not arriving after Juno gained control. It was arriving before. Before contact. Before commitment. Sometimes before Sarn's attack had fully formed. The divider flashed into Kavo's mind. Mark the spacing. Check the gap. Know where the load will go before anything heavy moves. He opened a deeper telemetry layer Rathkel, normally used only after injuries. Predicted collision paths filled the screen. Juno looked toward the glass. "What is it?" Sarn asked. Kavo did not answer. He overlaid the paths Juno had taken with the harsher ones she had avoided. One path disappeared. Then another. Then another. The list kept growing. And Kavo realized the worst question in the room was no longer how hard Juno could hit. It was how many times she had already decided not to. Kavo locked the court and sent the full session to Measure Hall before anyone could leave. Sarn rose, flexed his right hand and looked at Juno. "Stay available." "Sure." Juno pointed toward the storage slot. "Can I get my divider back after the review?" Sarn glanced at the little steel tool. "Yes." Kavo left it where it was. He ordered the court to preserve every motion layer, including the injury model normally hidden from students. The system took longer than usual. Too many alternate paths had to be drawn. Outside Measure Hall, Juno opened her paper notebook while Kavo built the review. Sarn returned from the routine medical check with no joint damage. He stopped beside her. "What are you writing?" "The footwork from your later recovery." "You just disarmed me." "I know. And you're taking notes on my footwork." "It was good footwork." Measure Hall called them in. Measure Hall held only a long table, wall screens, and the faculty members needed to change practical doctrine. Sarn sat on his side. Juno sat opposite him. Kavo stood at the main display and loaded the opening predictive overlay. The wall filled with paths. White showed what happened. Amber showed safe options. Red showed outcomes the court had judged more likely to cause injury. Juno leaned forward. Sarn did not move. Cavo started with the scoring touch. The system added the harder strikes Juno could have used from the same position, all above the force she chose. Next came the wrist opening. A hard twist could have driven Sarn past the safe range. Juno had used her fingertips and stopped when his grip opened. Then came the stumble. She had access to his balance and back. She had caught his coat instead. Sarn's eyes followed every red line. Cavo loaded the committed rotational cut last. The wall became crowded. Direct collision. Deep wrist turn. Shoulder lock. Hard drop. All possible from positions the court had recorded. None taken. The actual path remained almost plain. Step with the turn. Unload the grip. Open the lock. Guide the fall. Cavo said, "This is why I stopped trying to find her maximum." An examiner asked, "Because the limiter hit it?" "No, because she hit it." Juno frowned. "I wasn't hiding anything." Cavo believed her. "You were choosing lower force answers before contact," he said. "The system expects restraint after control is gained. You were building restraint into the way you gained control." Juno glanced at the paths. That seemed safer. The examiner across from Sarn shifted in his chair. Cavo advanced to the earliest exchange. The bare-handed sword stop appeared as a simple white line. This was not a strength event. Sarn spoke before anyone else could. "No, it was a placement event." Cavo nodded. The divider sat in its clear box on the table, its rounded legs spread slightly apart. Cavo placed the opening interception beside a diagram from her intake explanation. Spacing. Support. Load direction. The same idea. Different object. Juno's eyes moved from the divider to the screen. "My grandfather used to make me check twice," she said. "For damaged machines?" Sarn asked. "Yes." "Before anyone went underneath?" She nodded. Sarn looked back at the red injury paths. Nothing in his face moved for a few seconds. Earlier choices shifted meaning at once. The consent checks, the wrist watching, the open strikes she had left unused. Know where the load could go wrong before anything moved. Cavo picked up the review stylus. It failed. The battery light blinked once and died. No one spoke while he opened the drawer and found another. He tested it on the slate, then wrote Juno Hale at the top of the report. Then he turned back to the wall. Run full restraint comparison. The system obeyed. The screen stripped away the actual fight and showed only choices. At each exchange, a safe path remained bright. Around it sat harder options Juno had not taken. Soon the faculty stopped looking at moves and watched the pattern. Sarn leaned back. "How early does it start?" Cavo isolated the opening committed attack. "Before your blade reaches full speed." The next, "Before your recovery." The final cut. Cavo enlarged the shoulder and hip data. "Before you committed your grip." Sarn's eyes went to Juno. "You knew what I was going to do." "No." Cavo turned. Juno pointed toward the motion graph. "I knew what you were making hard to change." That silenced the room. Sarn looked at his own shoulder trace. Cavo understood the difference. Juno did not need the exact attack. She needed the part of Sarn's body that had already accepted the load. The machine had seen speed. Juno had seen commitment. A faculty member asked, "Then what did the axiom warning mean?" Cavo opened the original scanner result. The red words appeared again. "Do not engage." This time, nobody called them an error. Cavo brought up the threat model's rejected recommendations. It had tried to choose distance. Failed. Tried to choose pressure. Failed. Tried to choose a safe opening pattern. Failed. Not because Juno was guaranteed to attack, because every normal plan assumed the other person would reveal a useful limit under pressure. Juno had done the opposite. More pressure, less force. More speed, less motion. More openings, fewer strikes. The model could not make her limit visible without asking someone to enter a contest Juno was already making safer. Kavo faced Sarn. The array was not saying she would attack us. He pointed to the rejected plans. It was saying our normal engagement test could not tell us what she was without making someone else the measuring tool. Sarn looked down at his right hand. The new directive stopped being a faculty problem at that moment. It became Sarn Ket sitting at the table. Sarn Ket had trusted the court because he knew exactly how much risk its limits allowed. Juno had spent the whole assessment cutting that risk lower without being asked. He lifted his eyes. The doctrine is wrong. Nobody argued. Sarn stood and moved to Kavo's side of the table. Not the part about testing. He took the spare stylus. The part about assuming pressure reveals the truth. Kavo let him write. Sarn rewrote the human practical rule. Visible anatomy could not set the threat ceiling. Escalation limits required agreement. Any mismatch required fresh consent. Force data had to check under output, not just excess. If the system could not find a safe classification path, the test stopped. Juno read the draft. "Can I ask something?" Sarn handed her the slate. "What? Does this mean humans don't get to spar?" Kavo stared at her. Sarn almost smiled again. "No." "Good. You are worried about losing sparring access." "I came here to learn." Sarn looked at the faculty. The room had been changing rules around humans. Juno was worried the rules might keep her out of class. Kavo moved to the classification field. The old system still showed blank. He entered a new practical note. Cooperative. Adaptive. Consent required before escalated testing. No automatic assumption from appearance. Sarn read it. Add restraint. Kavo looked at him. Sarn's voice stayed level. That is the part we failed to measure. Kavo added it. The field accepted the entry. At last, Juno's panel stopped showing a red border. A new status appeared. Not harmless. Not hostile. Classified. The room remained quiet. Kavo returned to the restraint display and selected the final cut. Rathkel had treated restraint as the absence of danger. Kavo entered it as a capability. Sarn signed the directive. Kavo signed beneath him. The lead examiner added the faculty mark. The change went live. Across Rathkel, practical instructors received the new human assessment notice. No alarm sounded, no speech followed. Juno's old blank classification vanished. Kavo closed the file. That should have been the end of the review. Sarn kept the door from shutting. "Juno." She looked up. He held out the practice slate containing his sequence notes. "You said you wanted to learn." Her face changed more at that than it had when she disarmed him. "Not much. Just enough. The recovery step. The one you wrote down." "Yes." "You wrote it wrong." Juno opened her notebook at once. "Where?" Sarn pointed toward the practice hall. "Come find out." Kavo watched them leave measure hall together. Sarn was already explaining foot position with his hands. Halfway down the corridor, he stopped and demonstrated the turn. Juno copied it badly. He corrected her front foot. She tried again. Kavo looked down at the only item left on the review table. The steel divider. He opened its intake record. Civilian measuring implement. The phrase no longer fit. He removed it. For several seconds, the designation field stayed empty. Then he typed, Human Leverage Familiarization Tool, Training Reference. He approved the change. The archive accepted it without warning. Later, Juno returned for the divider. Kavo met her at the teaching hall, rather than sending it through storage. Sarn was already there, waiting beside an unpowered practice sword. Juno took the divider from Kavo with both hands. Can I still carry it? Yes. Even though it's a training reference now. It is still yours. She turned it over, checked the hinge, and slipped it into her pocket. Sarn tapped the floor with his boot. Your front foot. Juno looked down. She moved it. Too far. She moved it back. Sarn shook his head. Juno tried again. This time he nodded. Kavo stepped out of the hall. Behind the glass, the new assessment notice sat beside Juno's name. On the floor, Sarn reset his stance. Juno matched it. The worn divider made a small shape beneath the cloth of her pocket. Across the hall, the old Axiom screen still held a red line. Do not engage.